What incredible story do you have to share? Story 1. When I was in high school, and the few years after, my primary source of income was selling recreational herbs. One day I was just hanging out at home with my girlfriend. We went to the Circle K a few houses down and got some beer. The clerk, who I knew pretty well at this point, asked if he knew where I could get a small bag. I said sure and that I'd be back soon. I went home and forgot about it. An hour or two later I remembered, waited out and went back. He had already given me the money, very important detail for later, so I waited until he had no customers. He came out, and we went around the icebox, just chatting. I handed him the bag. There was no one around, just an empty lot, except for this beat-up Volvo facing the record store next door. If I had been paying better attention, I may have noticed this Volvo had completely tinted windows, which seemed odd to do on a beat-up car. Two men got out of the car and approached us. One tall, skinny guy wearing all denim, and another guy who looked like a rugged bounty hunter in a beige sweater. They approached us and asked how we were doing. The clerk and I looked at each other like, "You know these guys?" Then all of a sudden they flashed badges and yelled, "EPD, you're under arrest," and cuffed us, separated us, and searched us. Beige sweater went through my texts, found a couple dubious ones, a few crumpled up 20s, and started trying to get me to admit to doing a lot of business today, blah, blah. Then they surprised me by walking me and my girlfriend back to my porch, saying they've seen me come and go quite a bit and just want to make sure you don't have anything serious in there, and that they'll just charge me with a misdemeanor. Otherwise, it would be jail and a serious charge. So there we were on my front porch, me saying there's no way I would let them in my house, and to call my lawyer over and over. At one point, my roommate walked out, said hi, got in his car, and left. At this point, the guy in the sweater explained that if I didn't let him search the house, he'd park a few squad cars on the lawn, extract everyone from the house, and wait for a warrant, charging everyone in the house with every little thing they find in any room. I now know this wasn't legal. Back then, I was just scared. My roommate that had just left was a total straight-edge guy with a great job. Rarely drank and never touched anything. Unfortunately for me, I had just had an opportunity to get a good deal on some mushrooms. My area was pretty dry on them at the time, so I asked around and basically had all my deals set before I got it. This timing was perfect, because just 30 feet away on the coffee table of my bedroom was a quarter-pound of mushrooms, neatly weighed out. Top that with all the recreational herbs in there. It wasn't looking pretty, so I proposed that I let one of them in to search just my bedroom and be done with it. I knew once I let them in, they could do whatever, but I was out of options. Beige sweater agreed. The other guy stayed with my girlfriend, who looked terrified, like, "WTF are you doing at me?" And the guy in the sweater entered with me. I led him upstairs, walked right past my door, thankfully closed, and into the straight-edge guy's room. He completely turned it over, took out drawers, turned the mattress over, the whole shebang. As he did this, I quietly turned off the computer monitor with a background of my roommate and his girlfriend on it. He found nothing, stuck with his agreement, and walked me and my relieved grin back downstairs. My girlfriend, probably assuming I was going to face serious trouble, looked like she was about to cry, but I was just grinning. They still charged me with a misdemeanor. Then they left. Long story short, I paid a lot for a great attorney who was friends with the prosecutor. Since no money was seen to be exchanged, the charge was knocked down to a minor offense. I paid a $121 fine, did 80 hours of community service at a local music venue, saw a ton of shows for free, and retired from that business. Story 2. When my mom was pregnant with me, she and my father divorced, and he gave up all parental rights. I've never met him or spoken to him, and I've only seen a few pictures. About 2 years ago, I worked at a healthcare facility where I would float to different offices around the county based on who needed help. This one particular morning, I was checking the doctor's schedule and saw my father's name. He was scheduled to be in the office next door to where I was working, and I thought it was pretty crazy, but I most likely wouldn't even see him. The time of his appointment came, and he walked into my office straight up to me and said he had an appointment with Dr. X. My heart was racing because I knew it was him as soon as he walked through the door. I told him Dr. X was in the office next door and he left. A little while later, I walked over to the other office to deliver some faxes, and on my way out, he trailed behind me and I held the door for him. He said, "Thank you." And that was my one and only interaction with my father in my 30 years of living. Story 3. About 3, 4 years ago, I was living in a bigger European city for some years. I went with a friend to a pub, and since all tables were full, we sat at the bar. There was an older guy sitting next to me, about 50, white hair, smoking a cigar, who kind of distracted me because he reminded me of my uncle. Now bear in mind, my uncle had been living in the US for around 25 years already. He didn't look like that dude, nor did he act too similar. That bar guy just had some gestures that reminded me of him, mixed with the look of another distant relative. So my friend went to the restroom and I couldn't hold back anymore. I looked this guy in the eyes and told him he reminded me of my uncle. He jokingly asked, "What's his name?" I told him and also mentioned, well, he lives in the US and works in field_of_work. The guy then looked stunned and told me the names of my entire family. Turns out he was my uncle's flatmate 30 years ago for about half a year. That was definitely one of the weirdest bar stories I've experienced. Story 4. So my brother and I are fraternal twins. My stepmom passed away due to illness when we were around 15 years old. She was like a second mother to us and had been around since we were very young, about 5 years old. Now fast forward to our junior year of college. I attended a school in upstate NY while he attended a university in Florida. One night I woke up in a sweat with tears in my eyes. I had the most vivid dream. I was in a house and my stepmom was there. I knew she had passed in this dream, which was a first for me. She hugged me, told me how handsome I had become, and that she loved me. I woke up drenched in sweat thinking, what was that? I didn't say anything to anybody and went to class. As I was walking back to my apartment after class, I got a call from my brother. His first words were, "I know this is going to sound weird, but I had the most vivid dream about Maggie last night." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as he went on to describe the same dream I had experienced the night before. We've never had a moment like this as twins, and I don't really know what to make of it, but it's always been a story that I wanted to tell. Story 5. During a flight, I was served lunch. While eating, I noticed that the woman next to me was slowing down in her movements, slower cutting, slower chewing, etc. Suddenly, she stopped completely, fork and knife in hand, half-cut food on her plate, her face bowed forward above her meal, not moving at all. I touched her on the shoulder, pushed a little, asked if everything was okay. No reaction. I couldn't really tell if she was still okay. Was it the air conditioning or her breath? I had no idea. Not wanting to panic and frighten everyone, I made eye contact with a flight attendant and pointed towards the woman next to me. A few minutes later, several attendants, including the co-pilot, formed a barrier around our seats, trying to get a reaction like in a movie saying, "Don't you go on us." The woman suddenly woke up, looked up, and said just one sentence. I took really strong sleeping pills, and then went back to sleep in the same position. It was as if this had happened before, and she anticipated this conversation, as if she knew she would wake just long enough to say that. So for the entire remaining 6, 7 hours of the flight, there she was, frozen in place, mimicking a statue and drooling on the table. And everyone passing by gave me these questioning looks. Story 6. I saved a man's life, and I never saw him again. 10 years later, this is still the craziest thing that has ever happened to me. In high school, I worked as a lifeguard at a country club for a few summers to earn some money. It was a nice job, mostly about learning people's names and interacting with them. Mostly just saying, "Good morning, Mr. Garrity," and listening to some casual complaints about young people. Over the 4th of July weekend, there were more people at the pool than usual. Each member could sign in one guest, and there was a middle-aged man jumping off the diving boards who I hadn't seen before. He was over 6 feet tall, at least 230 pounds, and was doing fancy jumps off the low dive to make big splashes and impress his friends. One particular jump went wrong when he got a running start and slipped off the board at the very end. His momentum was already leaning backward, and his head rotated back, hitting the diving board hard. I can still hear that cracking sound in my mind. I was sitting in the lifeguard chair, about 8 feet off the ground, watching this unfold and hoping that I wouldn't have to act, even though I knew things were about to get serious. I didn't see any blood, which was a good sign. But as I watched his body sink down, I counted 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. No movement. I blew 3 short whistles, the signal to the other guards that I needed the backboard, and jumped in with my buoy, making as little splash as possible. My training took over as I dove down to grab this man. He was out cold, completely unresponsive. Even though he was a big guy, he wasn't as heavy in the water, and I managed to lift him and kick us both to the surface. I placed him on the buoy and swam to the edge, where the other guards had the backboard ready. We strapped him to the board and carefully lifted him out of the water. Looking around, I saw shocked faces, and I realized I was in charge of this situation. Still running on adrenaline in my training, I shouted for someone to call an ambulance and then made a quick decision. I thought he probably had a neck injury, and the board was designed to keep his head still to prevent further injury. But he wasn't visibly breathing, so I knew I had to act fast. I started chest compressions. What they don't tell you about chest compressions is that you sometimes feel bones and cartilage cracking. It's a terrible sensation. After one round of 30 compressions, I gave 2 rescue breaths. Thankfully, I didn't have to tilt his head much because he was already positioned properly. After another few compressions, he suddenly coughed, and a bit of water came out of his mouth. He started breathing, and the other guards quickly took him away on the board. I sat there on the concrete, feeling dazed and overwhelmed. It took me a while to process everything that had happened. Later, I found out he was okay. The member who brought him thanked me, but I never saw that guy again. I'm glad my instincts kicked in. And even though I might not have done everything perfectly, he lived through it. Story 7. I'm from a small province in the Philippines and decided to move to Manila to work right after college in 2007. I joined a call center and made a lot of friends. I stayed with the company for about 2 years, but the night shifts weren't for me. Fast forward to 2013, my widowed mom met a French man through a mutual friend, and they eventually got engaged and married, planning to move to France. As they were preparing for their trip, I posted on social media about possible Filipino connections in France to help my mom transition smoothly. A former colleague from the call center contacted me saying she had a friend named Rowena who had been living in France for over 20 years and could help my mom. I told my mom to connect with Rowena on Facebook, and they started talking. One day, during a video call, they were discussing their husbands when my mom showed Rowena a vintage photo of her husband from his university days. It was an old picture of him sitting on a couch with his best friend. When Rowena saw the photo, she gasped. "That's my husband beside your husband," she said. She then went to her office and pulled out the exact same photo that her husband had kept all these years. It was such a surprising connection that none of us expected. Story 8. I'm a 19-year-old Scottish guy who was traveling around Europe for a month. We were in Budapest enjoying the clubs and parties. When it was time to leave, we booked an early morning train to Split. As we loaded our stuff into the taxis, we saw 3 guys sprinting down the road shouting, "Run!" We thought they were just having fun, but soon realized they weren't. As we got into the taxis, a guy covered in tattoos and blood approached me, asking to shake my hand. Not wanting to offend him, I shook his hand, and he wished me well. Thankfully, nothing more happened. However, when he tried to shake the hand of our taxi driver, the driver refused. This angered the guy, and he started attacking the taxi, banging on it, and even breaking windows. We thought we had escaped, but he kept chasing us with a wild look in his eyes. The situation escalated, but eventually the man left. The craziest part was that, as he walked away, he apologized to a local watching the whole scene. It was one of the most bizarre and terrifying experiences of my trip. Story 9. In the early 1980s, my family lived in Kentucky near Cincinnati. My uncle, who lived nearby, had a daughter who moved south with her boyfriend. After not hearing from her for a while, my uncle became worried. She finally called him, saying she was being mistreated by her boyfriend's family and needed help. My uncle, a hunter and gun collector, packed up his car with his weapons and drove to the boyfriend's family home in a remote area. When he arrived, the family tried to scare him off by firing shots into the air. But my uncle calmly set up his rifles on his car's hood and demanded his daughter be brought out. He threatened to come in if she wasn't released in 5 minutes. The family quickly brought her out with her suitcase, clearly intimidated by my uncle's presence. He got his daughter back safely that night. Another time, he had a confrontation on a narrow bridge with some men in a truck. When they challenged him, he asked if they knew how to swim, implying he'd throw them into the river if they didn't move. They backed off, letting him pass without a fight. Story 10. I work as a team leader in a supermarket. I always try to include new employees and make them feel welcome. There was a new guy, around 17 years old, who was very quiet. He eventually opened up to me, but not to others. I later found out he was doing community service and was hired because he was paid half the normal wage. A year later, I was confronted by some guys outside a bar. Just when I thought things were about to get bad, The former coworker showed up with his friends. They intervened and made the troublemakers back off. I never forgot how they stood up for me that night, and we still exchange a nod whenever we see each other. Story 11. When I was learning to fly at a sketchy flight school, I was doing a pre-flight check, close to the end of the program. I was doing the run-up in a Cessna when I smelled something. "Do you smell that? Smells like gas," I said. The instructor, 21 years old, shrugged. Annoyed, I opened the door and there was a spreading puddle of avgas under the plane. Not good. The instructor panicked, saying, "Stay in the plane, I'll get help," and ran off. As soon as I got the engine off, I got out of there and watched the plane dump all its fuel on the runway. They kindly gave me another plane and instructor. They fixed their plane, and a month later I read about the same plane having an accident due to fuel issues, resulting in one fatality. No significant repercussions for the company. Story 12. I'm from Belgium and traveled a lot with my parents when I was younger. When I was still together with my ex-girlfriend, we traveled a lot as well, but neither of us had been to the USA, so we told this to a befriended couple, and a few beers later, we started planning a trip to go together because another mutual friend was studying in Philadelphia for a year, and we thought we might as well visit him. First, we went to New York and Philly for a few days, then took a plane to LA, rented a car, and took a road trip through California, Nevada, and Utah. During this road trip, we'd often laugh about some of the odd things we'd seen people do in America. We had a bunch of jokes about people in smaller villages and the quirky stuff they might do. We had just been to Sequoia National Park, and were looking for a place to spend the night and eat because it was getting late. We found an old farmhouse where we could stay in one of the fixed-up cabins and asked the old lady who rented it to us where we could go to eat something. This little town was called Pinehurst, and it had an extremely low population. She pointed us to the Pinehurst Lodge, which was basically the only restaurant/bar/store for miles. We went there, ate a great meal, and decided to grab some drinks afterward and shoot some pool. As we were playing pool, this older man approached us, wearing a denim shirt that said George W. Bush, a picture of an eagle with a bushy mustache, looking tough for his age. And we thought he might give us trouble for using the pool table and laughing too much. He turned out to be one of the kindest people I've ever met. He asked if we were having fun and if he could join us. He bought us some drinks, which we found hilarious, and we bought him a few beers as well. We had a blast the entire evening. While we were playing and drinking, the phone behind the counter kept ringing, but none of us were paying attention to it. Around 11:30 p.m., all of a sudden, a woman came barging in, looking pretty upset. She went straight up to our new friend and grabbed an empty bottle, then smashed it on the table. We were all shocked at what was happening. She started shouting at the man, but he calmly told her to relax, turned toward us, shook our hands, and said that if we ever came back, we should let him know so we could hang out again. Then he went outside with her. As we stood there, still trying to understand what had just happened, the woman at the bar just shouted at us, "That's his wife. He's a bit of a social butterfly," and she had already called 10 times to ask when he'd come home. We decided it was best to leave, but the bartender suggested we stay a little while longer for our safety. We waited about 30 more minutes, all the while hearing them argue outside. Eventually, we saw them leave in their vehicles, speeding off into the night. Story 13. I work in a prison as a nurse. Frequently, our inmates engage in a practice they call beading, where they insert small objects under the skin of their bodies. It's something that happens quite a bit. Pretty much every unit has someone skilled in this type of body modification. We had an inmate come to us who said he cut himself shaving, but clearly had an injury related to this practice. He was holding a towel to his injury, and everything was soaked in blood. When I took him into an exam room and got his clothes off, he mentioned that he had tried to fix the injury himself with a sewing kit. We had to remove his makeshift stitches, which caused a lot of bleeding. In the end, we were able to help him properly. It was one of the more unusual situations I've seen in my line of work. Story 14. When I was about 10, my family moved from the city to a small town in northern Australia. We started going to school, and after a few weeks, we made friends with the other kids. They kept telling us about this club in town called the Nature Rangers. The way they described it, it sounded like a kind of off-brand Boy Scouts with camping and hiking. They also said they gathered at their ranger hall on Fridays to have movie nights with popcorn and hot dogs. My sister and I begged our parents to let us join, so on Friday night we got dropped off at the hall. We lined up to go into the hall, and all the kids were joking and laughing. But as soon as we walked in, the mood shifted completely. There were all these signs on the walls with intense messages about faith and morality. It was an eye-opener for us city kids. They led us through songs and speeches that were much more intense than anything we expected. Then they separated the boys and girls, asking the boys to go on a late-night trip with one of the group leaders. That's when I knew we needed to get out of there. My sister and I snuck out and made our way home, creeping from yard to yard to avoid being seen. When we finally made it back, we told our parents everything. It's a story we laugh about now, but at the time, it was really intense. Story 15. I used to restore classic cars. I had the most valuable one I've ever owned at a body shop, and it was taking forever to get it finished. The shop owner had worked on other cars for me before, but this time things were moving slowly, and I later found out he had developed some personal issues. One day, I drove there unannounced and saw my car outside the shop with no one in sight. A neighbor mentioned that the car had been left outside for days and that several people had tried to tamper with it. So I called a tow truck and had it taken back to my garage right away. The shop owner kept calling me over and over, thinking the car was stolen. He tried to reach me for months, but I never responded. Story 16. I'm a pretty avid cyclist, which means whenever I have the time, I ride my bike away from the city I live in, into the mountainous suburbs, to challenge myself on some of the local climbs. During one of these excursions, I had just ridden up and down a big mountain and was on the road headed back to the city center. I was fairly tired, with still about 40 kilometers to go before getting home. Suddenly, I saw traffic on the opposite lane stopped for some reason. What I saw next was completely unexpected. A large ostrich was in my lane, right in front of me, running after the car ahead. It was surreal because the country I live in isn't known for having ostriches. I followed the ostrich cautiously as it kept running after the car in front of it, debating what to do. I remembered that ostriches can run very fast and might be aggressive, so I was hesitant to overtake it. But since it was getting dark and I wanted to get home quickly, I eventually decided to give it my all and overtook the ostrich. The rest of the ride wasn't as eventful and I managed to get home safely. To this day, it's one of the most surreal experiences I've ever had on a bike ride. Story 17. I didn't have a car when I was at university, which made going out with my friends a bit tricky. I would often find myself stumbling home late at night or early morning, waiting for the first train to leave. One night, after visiting friends, the only way back home was to take a train that followed a long rural route. My stop was near a small wooded area and a castle that looked straight out of a medieval tale. I knew the way well because I used to play there as a kid. To get home, I had to walk along a dark trail through fields, past stables, through a patch of woods that dipped into a slope, and then continue past an abandoned gatekeeper's house until I reached a bridge. There were no streetlights, and the place looked like a scene from a horror movie. Everything was fine until I reached the slope. As soon as the terrain dipped, there was zero light. I could barely see anything, and every little sound made my imagination run wild. I kept remembering what one of my teachers had said. The forest is one of the safest places to be at night because no one would wait for a victim in the middle of nowhere. Just as I started to relax, thinking I was alone, a jogger suddenly jumped out of the woods into my path. It startled me so much I couldn't even scream. The jogger ran past me, acting like it was the most normal thing in the world to be running through the dark forest at that hour. I eventually made it home safely and promised myself I wouldn't do that walk again. But of course, I ended up doing it a week later. Story 18. A few years ago when I was in college, I would stay late at the campus because I didn't have a PC at home and needed to use the school's facilities to finish my homework. One night, on my way back home on the last train, I noticed a guy acting a bit strangely. As the train was coming into the last station, this guy stood in the middle of the car, and as the train braked, he fell flat on his face from a standing position. He just laid there until the train stopped, then stood up, dusted himself off, and calmly walked out as if nothing had happened. I saw him do this a few more times on different nights, and after a while, it became amusing to watch the reactions of other passengers who had no idea what was going on. It was just one of those odd things that made the late-night train rides a bit more interesting. Story 19. My father used to live in Kazakhstan around 2006. One evening he was at a bar with a work friend when a tall, intimidating man came in. This man decided he wanted a specific bar stool, but instead of finding an empty one, he aggressively moved a woman from her seat. My dad, seeing this, intervened, asking the man what he was doing. The man then threatened my dad, saying he was going to cause trouble when they left the bar. As the situation escalated, my dad noticed that the man's friends were also joining in, making him even more uneasy. He quickly called the head of security, HOS, from his company, where he was the managing director. The HOS told my dad to stay put and soon arrived with around 30 bodyguards, all forming a protective line to escort him safely out of the bar. It was quite the sight, especially since the bodyguards were all equipped for any situation. In the end, they safely escorted my dad home, and he managed to avoid any further conflict. Story 20. I was traveling in Honduras with a friend and her group during the September 15th celebrations in a small town. We had a great day enjoying the festivities and eventually headed back to the hostel. Later that evening, while in the town plaza, we were looking for a bit of privacy. We found a spot between some columns and decided to be close to each other. As things progressed, something strange happened. She started shaking, and I noticed a weird sensation in my legs. At first, I thought we were both just very excited, but then I realized the feeling was more familiar. It was electricity. It turned out there were exposed wires in the column she was leaning against, and we were both getting a mild shock from it. I quickly pulled us away from the column, and we both caught our breath, a bit shaken, but thankfully okay. It was a scary moment, but we managed to laugh it off afterward. Story 21. About 19 years ago, 3-year-old me, my mom, and dad came home to find our cat, Nubs, was missing. The entire family turned the apartment upside down, but no trace of our cat was found. My mom decided to make missing flyers, even though all the doors and windows were locked at the time. Days turned into weeks, then months. She finally came to terms with the fact that her cat was gone. Cut to last year. My grandma suddenly says she lost Nubs. She explained that while we were out shopping, she decided to go to the mall across the street and used my baby stroller to carry extra bags. While in the mall, Nubs, who was hiding in the bottom mesh pouch under the seat, suddenly woke up and jumped out, running off. My grandma, too nervous and scared to ask for help, left the store without mentioning it. We got home about half an hour after she returned, and she even helped us look for the cat. It's both funny and emotional to think about what happened to my mom's favorite cat. After all these years, we finally know what really happened to Nubs. Story 22. My ex-girlfriend was pregnant with her former boyfriend's child. When I met her for the first time in person, she insisted that I would help raise the child whether I liked it or not. For context, I was 14, she was 16, and I was only going to be with her for a few weeks because I attended a summer camp near her city. I kept telling her that I wasn't ready to take on such a huge responsibility for a child that wasn't mine. She then got really upset and threatened me because of how unwilling I was. I tried to calm things down by suggesting she consider adoption as an option. This seemed to make her even more upset, but I managed to leave the situation mostly unscathed. A few days later, I reached out to apologize for being a bit inconsiderate, and she also apologized for trying to force me into such a hectic situation. She ended up realizing that adoption was the best choice for her, and she safely had the child. I haven't heard from her since. Story 23. Late one night, my friends and I decided to buy some recreational supplies. These were some of my nerdier friends, and we usually spent our time playing video games and D&D, so this was a bit out of the ordinary for us. This was before it was legalized in my state, but we were in high school and bored, so we went for it. We got in the car, reached out to a guy we knew, and agreed to meet at a Taco Bell in a nearby town. We got some food, waited for him to show up, and eventually did the exchange in the parking lot. As we drove away, my friend made a last-minute turn at an intersection, only to realize it was a mistake. Suddenly, lights and sirens appeared behind us. We hadn't used any of the supplies yet, but the smell was noticeable, and we were all nervous. The officer asked if we knew why we were pulled over and commented that our eyes looked a bit red. We denied everything, and one of my friends even offered to take a test to prove we were clean. After a tense moment, the officer seemed to believe us and asked for the license and registration. My friend, somehow keeping his cool, managed to hand over the documents without revealing what was in the glove box. After checking the information, the officer gave us a warning about our driving and let us go. We were so relieved and ended up laughing nervously all the way home. That was one of the wildest Thursday nights of my high school life. Story 24. I come from a small, conservative town with a mostly religious community. When I was in 8th grade, my parents got divorced, and my mom moved to a slightly bigger city. I started making friends who were a bit more worldly than I was used to. During my first house party that summer, I met this guy named Punk Rock Rob. Fast forward a few months, A friend and I decided to sneak over to a girl's house, but we got caught and kicked out. It was winter, and we had nowhere to go. We couldn't call our parents because we had told them we were staying at each other's houses. We remembered that Punk Rock Rob worked at a local sandwich shop, so we went there to ask for a ride home. Instead, he invited us to go to a party in a bigger city. We ended up in a rough area, which made me uncomfortable. To make things worse, we soon realized that Punk Rock Rob was involved with a group we definitely didn't want to be associated with. We spent the night there, trying to keep a low profile. It was one of the most surreal experiences of my life, and I was just relieved when one of our other friends agreed to come pick us up. That night changed my perspective on a lot of things, and I promised myself to be more careful about the situations I got into. Story 25. When I was in college, I was really into exploring the city while also enjoying some recreational substances. The campus was close to Philadelphia, and one day, I decided to go into the city, get a haircut, and do a little exploring. After wandering around for a bit, it started getting late, and I realized I was lost. I didn't know how to navigate my way back and needed some help, so I asked a guy who seemed familiar with the area. He was a friendly-looking guy wearing a hat and a hoodie and seemed pretty comfortable in the city. He introduced himself as Ron, and we started talking as we made our way to the subway. He mentioned he was studying IT, and I told him I was going for communications. We had a chill conversation, and when I told him where I needed to go, he said he was headed that way too. When we got to my stop, he started talking about going to a party together, which felt a little off to me because he seemed quite a bit older than me. I figured he helped me out, so I'd try to do him a favor in return. Once we got out of the subway, he bought me a drink and said he needed to make a call. A black car pulled up and he got in, but then I saw him arguing with someone inside. He ended up getting out of the car, clearly upset. That moment made me feel uneasy, but we sat on a stoop and talked for a bit. As we sat there, he started catcalling girls that walked by, which made me even more uncomfortable. I started thinking about whether I should continue hanging out with him. Still, I felt like I owed him since he had helped me out earlier. He eventually came to my dorm room and we ended up chatting for a while. He even helped me clean up my computer, which was actually really nice of him. After that, I decided it was time to call it a night and we said our goodbyes. Later, when I got back to my friends, they were all worried and told me I was lucky nothing went wrong. I laughed it off, but knew they were probably right. A few weeks later, Ron called me asking if I wanted to hang out again, but I politely declined. Another time he tried to sell me something and I turned it down too. Story 26. Back when I was in college, I liked to unwind by exploring the city and enjoying a bit of recreational fun. The campus was close to Philadelphia, and one day, I decided to head into the city to do some exploring and get a haircut. After walking around for a while, it got late, and I realized I had no idea how to get back. I asked a guy for directions. He seemed comfortable with the area, so I figured he'd know the way. He introduced himself as Ron, and we started talking as we walked to the subway together. He mentioned he was studying IT, and I told him about my communication studies. When we got close to my stop, things started to feel a bit off when he asked if I was going to any parties that night. He seemed a lot older than me, but I thought I'd help him out since he had done me a favor. After we got off the subway, he bought me a drink and made a call. A car pulled up and he got inside, but it seemed like there was a disagreement with the person in the car. He got out looking upset, which made me feel a little uncomfortable. We sat down on a stoop, and he started making some comments to people walking by, which was a bit unsettling. Despite my reservations, I still felt like I should keep him company since he helped me find my way back. We ended up at my dorm room, where he helped fix some issues on my computer. I was surprised that he actually knew what he was doing. Later, when I got back to my friends, they were shocked that I'd hung out with a stranger like that. I laughed it off, but knew they were right to be worried. Ron called me a couple of times afterward, but I decided not to meet up with him again. One time, he even offered to sell me something, which I politely declined. Story 27. Many years ago, I won a year's stay in the U.S. with the Rotary Club to experience living in California. I ended up living in Los Angeles and going to school there for a year. It was an amazing experience, though nothing too out of the ordinary happened during my stay. When my time there was up, my parents decided to come over for 2 weeks to see the place I had lived in for the past year. At the airport, as we were getting ready to board the flight, I went to the restroom, and when I returned, I couldn't find my parents in the waiting area. It turned out they had boarded the plane without me, not realizing that I wasn't with them. They were so used to me being away from home that they accidentally left me behind, along with my passport and boarding pass. So there I was, a 13-year-old trying to explain to the airport staff that my parents had gone ahead without me, and they had my documents. Luckily, the airline staff was able to retrieve my passport and boarding pass from my parents. I boarded the plane, walked up to my seat next to them, and jokingly said, "What was that all about?" Apparently, the whole situation had been announced over the plane's intercom, and people in the nearby seats burst into laughter. My mom had even raised her hand, waving my passport and ticket. Story 28. When my nieces were around 6 and 8, they had a pet rat named Spider-Man. Spider-Man was getting quite old and was having health issues, including some tumors that caused him a lot of discomfort. My brother asked if I could take the rat to the vet to see if anything could be done to help ease his pain, and I agreed. So my nieces and I took Spider-Man to the vet. While we were waiting, Spider-Man was making quite a bit of noise, clearly in distress. When it was our turn, the vet checked him over, mentioning that he had never treated a rat before. After examining him, the vet suggested that the kindest thing to do would be euthanasia, as there wasn't much else they could do for Spider-Man. The vet explained a humane way to put Spider-Man to sleep, but as he was speaking, the rat bit his finger hard. Startled, the vet yelled out in pain and accidentally flung Spider-Man against the wall, which sadly ended the rat's life instantly. There was a stunned silence, and then my nieces began to cry. The vet felt awful and apologized over and over. He gave them some stuffed animals and a lot of free items for their other pets at home. We weren't charged for the visit, and despite that incident, I've continued to take my pets to that vet for 15 years, and he's been great ever since. Rest in peace, Spider-Man. Story 29. About 3 years ago, right after high school, my friends and I went trekking in Iceland. After spending a week camping, we decided to treat ourselves to a stay in an Airbnb in the city. The apartment was nice, but it had some unsettling artwork, and there was a locked room that we didn't think much about. On the last day of our trip, 2 of my friends went to return a tent we had borrowed from the host. He wasn't home, but his girlfriend was, and she accidentally left the door to that locked room wide open. To our shock, the room was filled with disturbing memorabilia, including flags, books, and pictures that were offensive and completely inappropriate. We took a few photos of the room before leaving, feeling very unsettled by what we saw. It was a surreal experience, especially considering that our group included people who were directly affected by the themes represented in that room. Story 30. While working as a receptionist at a hotel, there was an event held by a company which wasn't out of the ordinary. Guests came in, attended seminars, and stayed the night. Everything seemed normal. During the day, a woman with her kids came in asking for her husband. I looked up the name, called his room, and he came down to meet his family. They seemed like a perfectly happy family, exchanging hugs and kisses. Later that evening, after the event ended, most of the guests had gone to bed except for a couple who stayed in the bar area. I noticed through the cameras that they were getting very close to each other, and before long, things became a bit too public for a hotel lobby. After a while, they finally decided to head to the elevator, but instead of going up to the guest rooms, they went down to the basement. When I checked the area afterward, I saw signs that confirmed they had continued their activities there. Later on, I realized that the man was the same guest whose family had come to see him earlier that day. I was pretty irritated by the whole situation, so I did some online sleuthing and discovered the man's wife on social media. I ended up sending her a message about her husband's behavior just in case it was ever needed as evidence. When the guest found out, he was furious and came back to confront the hotel staff. Luckily, my manager backed me up, understanding the situation. It was one of those moments where you see the true character of people, both in the guests and even in some of my own colleagues. Story 31. I once dropped out of school to join a band that, looking back, was pretty rough. Our drummer S was going through a tough breakup right around the time I joined. Things were going fairly normally until one night when our band manager came over. S was venting to the manager about how upset she was over her breakup, and in her frustration, she said some things out of anger that she didn't really mean, including a comment about wishing her ex was gone. After that conversation, S felt better, and the manager casually said, "I'll take care of this," before leaving. We didn't think much of it at the time. A couple of weeks later, S received a panicked call from her ex, who was being rushed to the hospital with severe stomach pains. Later, our manager came back and hinted that he was behind the ex's condition, saying that he had taken care of it. We were shocked and started asking what exactly he had done. It turned out our manager worked in a lab and had access to various chemicals. He devised a plan to give S's ex a substance that would cause a serious reaction in her stomach. He had tried to create a chemical concoction that, if it reacted as he intended, would have been very dangerous. When he invited her over and offered her a pill for her headache, she took it, not knowing what it really was. Fortunately, he miscalculated, and the dose wasn't strong enough to cause the harm he intended. It was a horrifying moment of realization, and we were all shaken by the lengths he was willing to go. Story 32. I once had a job cleaning hotel rooms. On my third day, I was still training with a coworker, and we were working on our last room for the day, the King Suite. We walked in, and everything seemed pretty standard, a bit messy, with some empty beer bottles, pizza boxes, and a squash on the counter. As we opened the closet, though, the smell hit us immediately. It was awful, and we saw a sheet that was supposed to be white, but it was a dirty brown color. My coworker handled that while I focused on the beds and general cleaning. While cleaning the linoleum floor in the kitchen area, my coworker noticed a weird residue on it, thinking that maybe the guests had spilled something. I continued working, wondering what kind of mess we'd walked into. I noticed the squash on the counter and thought it might be a nice decoration for fall, so I picked it up to take back to the cart. But then I felt a strange, greasy film on it. I took a closer sniff, and that's when I realized it wasn't just a normal squash, it was covered in something far more unpleasant. That's when everything made sense, the mess on the floor, the dirty sheet, and now this. I turned to my coworker and said, "This thing has lube on it." I decided then and there that this job was not for me. I walked out of the hotel and never looked back. And that, my friends, is the story of the infamous ass squash. Story 33. This story covers my life experiences from when I was about 12 to 13 years old up until now. I grew up in a small green 2-story house with my family of 5. My dad worked as a mechanic, and his boss, Frank, was someone I knew for as long as I could remember. Life was pretty normal until misfortune struck. Frank, my dad's boss, was diagnosed with cancer and passed away. With Frank gone, my dad lost his job, and suddenly we had no income coming in. My mom eventually found a job at a grocery store, but money was still tight. To make matters worse, my dad's health took a sudden turn. He became seriously ill, and we later found out that he had undiagnosed diabetes. It got to the point where he couldn't eat or drink without getting sick, and he was eventually hospitalized. The doctors said that if he hadn't come in when he did, he might not have survived. We ended up moving to Wisconsin to live with my grandparents so we could better manage our situation. My mom got a job and my dad began learning to cope with his diabetes, which he was still reluctant to take seriously, despite it saving his life multiple times. Life in Wisconsin brought its own challenges. My dad and grandpa didn't get along well, and there were plenty of arguments. School was difficult, and I made a few poor choices about who to hang out with, which left me feeling isolated. I did find some solace in my music classes and my bond with my grandma. Eventually, we moved in with my Uncle Tim. We lived in his basement, and although it was cramped, it was home. I wasn't enrolled in school for a while, so I spent my days watching anime and playing games. It was a strange time, both relaxing and isolating. After some time, tensions rose again when Tim let another person, Alex, move in. Alex had a sketchy past, and it became clear that he was trying to push my family out of the house. The situation grew tense, and my parents decided to send my brother and me to stay with our grandma temporarily. That time was marked by solitude and paranoia as I spent most of my days in a room by myself. The experience in Wisconsin was a roller coaster of emotions, from making new friends to feeling completely isolated. Through all the ups and downs, I kept pushing forward, even when the world seemed to be closing in around me. Though I've left a lot of those challenges behind, they've left a lasting impact on how I view life and the people around me. Story 34. When I was in the Army, a friend and I went out to grab some pizza, and it was honestly the best pizza I'd ever had at that point. I ate an entire pie by myself. Later, my buddy was supposed to meet up with a girl he had met online, and she had a friend who was interested in me as well. Things were looking good, but they said they couldn't hang out in town and asked if we could follow them back to their place because it was only 20 minutes away. Being young and carefree, we agreed and started driving into the back roads of Kentucky. An hour later, we pulled over, and the girl who was supposed to be my match suddenly got out of the truck and did something quite unexpected. It didn't turn out to be a deal breaker, but at that point, all I could think about was that I also needed to go to the bathroom. Badly. I tried to relieve myself behind the car, but nothing was happening. I felt like I was in a scene from The Green Mile, struggling in vain. Eventually, I gave up and got back in the car. We finally arrived at their place another 30 minutes later, and their roommate turned out to be a fabulous drag queen, busy preparing for a show. All I could think about, though, was my urgent need to use the bathroom. When I finally made it to the bathroom, let's just say it was a monumental relief. I realized that my earlier issues were because my system was so backed up. I did my best to clean up, knowing the situation was a bit out of control. Meanwhile, I could hear a commotion outside. My friend had tried to negotiate a three-way, and it didn't go over well. We were promptly kicked out of the house. As we were leaving, the drag queen roommate ran out yelling, "What did you do to our toilet?" We jumped in the car and sped off, laughing our now relieved selves silly. Story 35. It was around 1996 to 97, and I was a teenager living in a small town in Minnesota. My friends and I were really into the idea of finding a hidden field of cannabis inspired by movies we'd seen. One of my friends claimed he knew of a field growing on a nearby farm, so naturally, we had to check it out. We waited until the weekend and set off to find this mythical field. We parked the car a bit away from the farm and started walking towards the barn, hoping to get a glimpse of the plants. As we got closer, we found chopped up stalks and leaves scattered on the ground. It looked like someone had just mowed over them. Thinking they might be drying the plants in the barn, we went inside to investigate. I went up to the second floor, and as I looked out, I saw a truck racing down the driveway straight towards the barn. I knew we were in trouble and yelled, "Run!" Without a second thought, I jumped out of the barn's second-floor window. It felt like I was in the air forever before I hit the ground and rolled. My friends followed, and we all sprinted into the cornfields to hide. The truck circled the fields a few times, trying to catch us, but eventually gave up and went back to the house. We regrouped and headed back to the car, only to find the police waiting for us. They questioned us, and seeing a growing guide in the car, figured out what we were up to. Luckily, they let us off with a trespassing warning. Even though we got caught, it's a memory I'll never forget, and I'm still good friends with those guys to this day. Story 36. When I was 18, I was deployed to Afghanistan as a cavalry scout with the Army. One night, we set up a hidden vehicle checkpoint in a dry riverbed north of Kandahar. We had been told that locals didn't usually travel at night, so anything we saw was suspicious. Just as we were about to pack up, two trucks appeared on the horizon and drove right into our checkpoint. We pulled them over, and it turned out they were filled to the brim with chickens in giant wire cages. The drivers were terrified, thinking we were going to harm them. They explained that the police checkpoint in a nearby mountain pass was actually a toll point where they were being robbed. We had seen that checkpoint earlier, but it seemed calm with only two guards. My lieutenant decided we would follow the chicken trucks back up the pass to see what was really going on. As we approached, we saw that the checkpoint now had about 10 armed men instead of 2. One of the guards aggressively shoved his weapon into the chicken truck driver's window, demanding money. That was enough for us. We lit up our lights and crashed the checkpoint. As we rounded up the guards, we were told to check out a strange rock formation nearby. It turned out to be a hideout filled with even more armed men and a stash of weapons, cash, and stolen goods. We detained everyone and secured the area. Though we had to release the men eventually, we didn't let the stolen items go to waste. When the grateful chicken truck drivers returned, my lieutenant started handing them the money and items that the robbers had taken. The drivers were overjoyed, laughing and crying with relief. That night changed how we approached every checkpoint from then on, and it's a story that has stayed with me ever since. Story 37. About 3 years ago, I had a frightening experience when a random guy attempted to hijack my vehicle. On Thursday nights, I usually hang out with friends to play Magic, the Gathering, and watch videos. Often heading home around 2 or 3 a.m., I live near the University of Notre Dame in northern Indiana. And while crime does exist in the surrounding areas, it's not typically a big concern near the campus. One July night, as I was driving home, I pulled up to a stoplight. I noticed an old Ford Explorer next to me that was rocking back and forth like someone was headbanging to music. I didn't think much of it until the light turned green, and the Explorer suddenly sped in front of me before slamming on its brakes. We both came to a complete stop, and I had no idea what was going on. I decided to go around the vehicle, but as I did, the driver spun around in a U-turn to face me, and that's when I realized this situation was bad news. I sped past him, but he caught up quickly and got side by side with my Jeep. When I looked over, I saw a guy who fit the stereotypical tough guy look, complete with a sneer and something in his hand that I feared was a weapon. He overtook me again and stopped abruptly, but I turned down a side road into a residential area, hoping to lose him. As I was fumbling to call 911, I saw his headlights swerving behind me like something straight out of a horror movie. It felt like forever before the operator picked up. At this point, I was yelling into my phone that I was being chased while taking a sharp turn into my apartment complex. I glanced in my rearview mirror just in time to see his car lose control and veer into a ditch. I drove to a nearby complex and hid my car in a parking spot, still on the line with 911. When the police arrived about 15 minutes later, I told them everything that happened. They said the guy had abandoned his vehicle after his front tire blew out during the turn. I never found out what happened to him or why he targeted me, but for the next month, I parked in a different lot just to be safe. I'm not religious, but if there's any kind of higher power out there, I owe some gratitude for getting out of that situation unharmed. Story 38. When I was around 18, I was having a pretty typical night, just relaxing on my balcony, enjoying some peace and quiet. It was late, and since my neighborhood was usually safe, I decided to go for a walk to wind down before heading to bed. I brought my camera bag along as I often did. As I got to an intersection, a loud, lowered Chevy Silverado pulled up and started revving its engine. Instinctively, I pulled out my camera and began snapping pictures. The driver then started doing a burnout, which was pretty impressive to watch. The guy in the passenger seat waved me over, and I figured he just wanted to chat or see the pictures. But before I could get there, the light turned green and he yelled, "Jump in the truck!" Without thinking much, I jumped into the bed of the truck, only to find 3 other people already lying back there. I lay sideways against the tailgate, holding on for dear life as the truck sped off at what felt like over 100 miles per hour. One of the guys in the back grabbed my hand to steady me, which was both comforting and a little nerve-wracking. We finally came to a stop outside a nightclub, and everyone was super excited that I had joined them. A guy with an Eastern European accent came over and laughed, saying, "You're crazy for jumping into that truck." The rest of the group introduced themselves as Newfoundlanders who had recently moved to Louisiana, and they all seemed pretty welcoming. Unfortunately, I hadn't planned on going to a nightclub, so I didn't have my wallet or ID with me. One of the guys handed me an ID that belonged to a 40-year-old man who vaguely resembled me. Somehow it worked, and I got into the club. They bought me drinks, and we had a great time. Later, we ended up at a friend's house, drinking wine with a friendly older woman and a very animated Russian guy. When it was time to head back, I asked them to drop me as close to where they'd pick me up as possible. We got back into the truck, and I lay in the bed once more, watching the lights blur past. To my surprise, the truck pulled up right at the gate of my apartment complex. It turned out that these guys lived just a few buildings over from me, and I never even knew it. After that night, I never saw them again, but it was definitely one of those wild, unforgettable experiences. Story 39. One night, I was out with 3 friends, and we were having a typical evening. After getting dropped off at my girlfriend's house, my friends went to pick up some supplies. A few hours later, they came back to get me, and we all decided to head home. Unfortunately, all of our phones died, and we ended up getting hopelessly lost. We took several wrong turns and eventually found ourselves crossing some railroad tracks. We quickly realized we were going the wrong way, and then it happened. The car got completely stuck on the tracks. We were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by farmland. Our friend, Buddy, who's originally from Liberia, decided to go to a nearby farmhouse to ask for help. The farmer, not recognizing us and probably wary of strangers, came out with a shotgun and told us to get off his property. Just then, we heard the distant sound of a train approaching. We all raced back to the car, grabbed what we could, and ran for cover. I remember watching in slow motion as the train collided with our tiny car, sparks flying everywhere. It was a surreal sight, and we all barely managed to get to safety in time. We were all under 18 except for Buddy. That night definitely ranks as one of the craziest experiences of my life. Story 40. My family, friends, and I took a long 13-hour drive to Panama City Beach for spring break, and just 20 minutes from our destination, we got a flat tire. We quickly put on the spare and made our way to the beach, eager to start our vacation. When we finally got there, my cousin pointed out the red flag on the beach and mentioned that it probably meant the waves would be amazing. We were all too excited to question it, and the moment we stepped onto the sand, 5 of us sprinted straight into the water. The waves were strong, really strong. Before we knew it, the current started pulling us out farther into the ocean. I was lucky to be near my bigger friend, but I had always teased him with silly jokes, so when I reached out for his hand, he actually hesitated for a second before helping me get to shore. Just as I thought I was safe, I heard my other cousin shouting for help from behind me. For a brief moment, I hesitated, knowing I wasn't a strong swimmer and that trying to save them could be dangerous. But then I thought, what would a hero do? So I swam out to them anyway. We linked hands and pushed toward the shore, but the current was fierce. Just when I started to lose hope, my cousins managed to grab me, and together we all made it safely back to land. We were exhausted, but everyone was okay, and now we laugh about how we all nearly got swept away by the waves. Story 41. I once matched with a nurse on Tinder while I was back home in Hawaii just a few days before Christmas in 2014. Things went well, and we decided to meet up. She invited me to visit her at work, which I thought was unusual. She quickly sent me her location, and when I pulled up, it wasn't a hospital or clinic, it was just a house. I called her, and she came out in her nurse's uniform. Seeing my confusion, she explained that she was an in-home caretaker. I felt a bit uneasy about meeting up at someone else's house, but I went in anyway. She assured me, "Don't worry, she won't know you're here," which only made me more uncomfortable. As we walked into the main room, I saw an elderly woman in a medical bed. She looked lifeless, with her mouth slightly open and her eyes closed. The nurse mentioned that the woman had been in that state for a couple of months. I glanced around the room and noticed there were no family photos, just a few old Christmas cards signed by her brother. After a short conversation, the nurse led me to a small back room with a cluttered bed. We sat down, and one thing led to another. Afterward, we returned to the main room and put on an NHL game. I was sitting there, just an arm's length away from the elderly woman, feeling conflicted about the whole situation. Months later, I remembered the woman's name and decided to look her up to see if she was still around. I discovered that she had passed away just 2 days after my visit. It was a strange and somewhat unsettling experience that stayed with me long after. Story 42. When I was about 12 years old, I had the chore of going out to our barn to feed the dogs that were kept in a kennel there. On my way back to the house, I heard a low hum in the sky. I looked up and saw a perfect cube with flashing orange lights all over it, hovering at about 300 feet off the ground, moving at around 30 miles per hour. I watched as it glided smoothly across the sky without tumbling, like a dice floating through the air. I got so excited that I ran as fast as I could back to the house, hoping my dad could come out and see it. Just before I reached the porch, the cube came to a complete stop and then suddenly shot straight up into the sky at a speed I couldn't comprehend. It went from hovering to completely disappearing in a split second. To this day, 22 years later, I still have no idea what I saw that night. I think about it constantly, wondering if it could have been a dream, but even my dad remembers me running into the house that night, hysterical and trying to explain what I had just seen.